Okay.
Okay, so very warm welcome everyone to this seminar series talk. Today we have Professor Filip Karfik from the University of Fribourg. He will talk about intelligible space and time in Plato Timaeus. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. I'll leave it the stage for you. Thank you.
Thank you for having invited me. I'm very pleased to can join you in this huge project. I saw your website and I saw that you had a comprehensive discussion of Plato's Timaeus back in May with several contributors and discussants. So it is very likely that you will already know everything I have to tell you, or I can to tell you today. Anyway, I saw that the project is, the focus of the project is time, if I understood well, and not only time in ancient philosophy, but probably also in connection with today's physics. And I was asked to contribute something about Plato's Timaeus in relation to this topic, and I thought that it could be interesting for you to reflect a little bit upon the relationship between time and space in the Timaeus, and to have a look on these two concepts in Plato, because they are somehow unfamiliar, I would say, to the modern reader, or the relationship Plato works out between them may be a bit surprising for us, for a very simple reason, because as we will see today, space is something in terms of principles. Space is something more fundamentally and more basic than time is. Time is a sort of result of the coming of the universe, which comes almost at the end, whereas a space is a prerequisite, is a precondition of making of the universe, such as Plato conceives of it. So this is the topic I would like to focus on in discussing or commenting on a few passages from the Timaeus in order to show what are Plato's main concepts, main distinctions, and what is the hierarchy, I would say, of these key concepts. And I took out three of them, as you see in my title, intelligibles, or we could say being, space, and time. And I would now to follow some passages. The handout consists of these passages. You have always the Greek text and the English translation, the classical one by Francis MacDonald Cornford. And I would try to summarize what we have in these passages, and then to comment a little bit. So to begin with, we have at the beginning of the discourse by Timaeus, the discourse about the origin and the making of the universe. We have a basic distinction first, as you know, the distinction between being on the one hand and becoming on the other hand, the ousia and genesis. And it comes a little bit out of the blue in the Timaeus, but there is some justification of this basic distinction, and this justification is an epistemological one, I would say. We have on the one hand the being which is said to be always identical and never becoming, that means never changing. And on the other hand, we have the becoming, the genesis or tokignomenon, which never is, in the sense of an identity which remains identical with itself, but which always becomes, that means always changes. Even we are told that it comes into being and it disappears again. So this is an ontological distinction we are all familiar with from other Plato's dialogues. But then there is a sort of justification of this distinction, of this ontological distinction in epistemological terms. And this is actually the only one we get in the Timaeus. In epistemological terms, because we are told here that basically there are two ways of encounter some objects in terms of knowledge. On the one hand, the thought or the intellection, and on the other hand, the sense perception. And becoming, genesis, is an object of sense perception, and being, which is always the same, that is some identical forms or structures or patterns we grasp by thought, aided or which relies on the process of reasoning. So the terms in Greek, as you know, are the nous for the intellectual insight, the intellectual grasp of the intelligible object, and this insight, this grasp, is accompanied by a process of reasoning, what we know from the politeia as the process of the dianoia. So as there is these two ways of knowledge, or let us say these two ways of knowledge, there is also two sort of objects of knowledge, which is being on the one hand and becoming on the other. There are two short texts, two short passages. Text one is the first one at the beginning of Timaeus' speech, and then in the middle, this is the text 2. There is another one, but which basically says the same thing. So we have to assume this basic distinction between eide, the forms, the eidenoumena, intelligible forms, on the one hand, and the aisthenomena, things perceived by senses, on the other hand, because they are these two kinds of knowledge, nous and doxa. Now, these are first distinctions, and on the basis of this distinction, we then have an argument which is already quite complicated, but you know it, and I will just sum up this argument, according to which there is a causal relationship between being on the one hand and becoming on the other hand. So whatever becomes must have a cause, and it is excluded that something which becomes what can become without having any cause. On the other hand, being itself doesn't, as it seems, require such a cause, at least on what we have in the Timaeus. Then the question is, what kind of entity, what kind of reality is the universe? If we have on the background of this basic distinction, and it's evident that the universe is something which becomes because it changes, and as something which changes and is sort of genesis, it must have a cause. And the question is what kind of cause it has. And now the argument is, it's a little bit more complicated, but the basic intuition, the basic idea is that the universe is a reality which changes, but which displays a sort of order, and which displaying a sort of order is something which is called beautiful. And this is the reason why we have to suppose that it has an intelligible cause, that is a pattern which accounts for its being ordered and beautiful. So the premise was something which becomes must have a cause. The question now is, what is this cause? It is another thing which changes, or it is something which is identical with itself. And the argument basically is, since there is a sort of order within changing universe, the cause of it must be a identical pattern, that is something which pertains to being in terms of intelligible forms. And the further element in this argument is that, as you know, that if we have this relationship being becoming dependent on being, this sort of causal dependence requires an agency, that is a productive agency. There must be something which is responsible for introducing the order into becoming based on the model of the intelligible being. This is what is exactly called the cause of becoming. It is a productive principle. And this productive principle, which doesn't produce out of nothing, but which orders what has been without order, this productive principle relies on an epistemologic or on an intellective grasp of an identical pattern according to which it orders the becoming. And this is the familiar picture we have in the Timaeus, the demiurge as this productive cause, looking up at the intelligible being on the one side and ordering the becoming on the other hand. So this is the stage, so to say. This is the general picture we get at the very beginning of Timaeus's speech about the origin or about the making of the universe. And now against this background, I suppose are familiar with. Against this background, I would like to look a little bit farther into the dialogue at what we are told there about another necessary element in the account about the making of the universe, which is space, according to Timaeus. And after having looked at what this space would be on Plato's account or Timaeus's account, I would like to briefly contrast with it the notion of time. So let me move to the topic of space. As you know, the structure of the account of the making of the universe in the Timaeus is somehow complex, and there is a particularity about this, several particularities about this structure, but one of them is that somehow in the middle of his account, the Timaeus, the character Timaeus tells us, well, we have started with this basic distinction of two kinds of reality, I would say, being on the one hand and becoming on the other hand. And we have tried to describe the making of the universe based on this basic fundamental distinction. But it is not enough, actually. We cannot explain what our universe is unless we add another kind of ontological principle, another kind of prerequisite of the making of the universe. And he explains why it is so. And this is what I would show you on these few passages. So he goes back to the sensible nature of the universe. That is, to the fact that we perceive the universe with our senses, basically, as something which is ordered and which is somehow differentiated in different kinds of bodies. And these different kinds of bodies are reduced to four basic ones: fire, water, air, and earth. As you know, the Empedoclean four basic bodies, or what we call elements. And Timaeus starts now to question the nature of these four elements as we perceive them. And questioning the nature of these elements as we perceive them, he states that none of them is something which remains identical with itself. This is no wonder, because we are speaking about becoming, about Genesis, where nothing is absolutely identical with itself, like the intelligible forms, so like this which we can grasp only by thought and to which we can always return as to something absolutely identical. Within the realm of becoming, this is not the case. But looking closely at these four elementary bodies, and this is the text T7, which is a little bit longer. I show it here in the English translation. Looking closer at the four elementary bodies, we not only see that each of them doesn't remain what it was, but that they change one into another as if it was in a sort of circle. That is, they come into being and they disappear in changing one into another, so that we cannot rely on their identity. Now, this text is a little bit longer, so I prepared a sort of paraphrasis of the argument, which I would like to read here. So the argument is the following one. What we call water changes, as we see, either into earth or into air, changes into fire, fire changes back into air, back into water, and water again back into earth. So it seems that there is a cyclic coming into being between these four elementary bodies. None of them appears to be always the same. What then is there to be called this and nothing else? Tuto kai uk allo, something which remains identical. Surely it isn't that what we see as becoming different at different times. Indeed, such a thing is not to be called this, a tuto, but each time such, totoiuton hekastote, or totoiuton ae. The words tode and tuto, this one, denote things which have a sort of stability, bebiotes, and are persistent, harmonima, whilst all those things which come into being and which in each instance, taken all together and through all of them, always occur as similar, are to be called toiuton, such and such. So not this one, but such and such. Thus, we can call fire, what we call fire is actually a toiuton, as such and such, not a tode or a tuto. And so is everything which is such and such. For example, hot or white, or whichever of the contraries, and everything that is a compound of them, of these qualities, as we would call them. On the other hand, the words tode and tuto are not to be applied, are to be applied only to that in which these things, in each instance, come into being and appear, and from where they pass away. So this is the conclusion of this argument. And the point is not only to tell us that sensible phenomena are nothing which is really identical, but are something which displays only a sort of similarity across the time, we would say. Also not only this, but the point is to tell us that these processes of change between entities which are perceived by senses take place somewhere. This somewhere and who, as we have in text, and that things appear somewhere and disappear somewhere. So come about from somewhere and disappear somewhere in something what we would call a sort of space. So first we have just these expressions like an whole and a kathan. Later we will be told by Timaeus that this out of which or where these appearances occur is something which he calls kora or space or topos, a place, and the like. So this is the point of the argument, that we have to take into account this thing in which processes of change do occur. Now, in the following text, T7, we have a sort of characteristic of this, of general characteristic of this third element, or the third principle, as it is called in the Timaeus, to be added to being and becoming. So we will have being, becoming, and space, and we are told that there is no becoming caused somehow by the agency which introduces some order into it based on the intellection of the intelligible forms or of the being, that there would be no such becoming unless there is a space in which it happens. So it will be actually another cause of becoming alongside being and the agency which casts, so to say, the intelligible patterns upon the processes of becoming. Now, this characteristic of this third principle, that of space, I tried to summarize it here in the paraphrases. It is a sort of physis, it's called a certain physis, that receives all bodies, that is everything which is bodily, and everything bodily belongs to becoming. Bodies become, change. This nature receives all bodies. It is to be spoken of itself as something identical, that this will turn out a sort of paradox, because space itself remains always what it is. It is a tauton, like being, like intelligible forms themselves. Space is also something which must be called tauton unless the appearances, the phenomena coming about in it. It absolutely doesn't depart from its power. This is the reason of its identity with itself, but it always receives everything without taking on, in whatever respect or manner, a form similar to whatever enters in it. That is, it is, as we are told in another passage, it is absolutely formless, has no form, has no determinacy. And this is one side of the paradox already, because this third principle is something which is to be called identical, a tauton, but it is an identity which cannot be grasped properly by thought because it has no form. It has no determination which would allow for intellection or for thinking to grasp it as something well defined and limited. So identical but formless. It is by nature an imprint holder, an ekmageion for everything. So it is the condition for everything else which comes into being, a condition of its appearance. We are told that it is moved and shaped by the agency of things which enter to it, and that on their account, on the account of the things which enter to it, which are conceived as a sort of images of the intelligible forms, there is this expression mimemata ton onton, so images of two beings. On the account of them, it appears, this physis appears to have different qualities at different times. This is also somehow paradoxical and maybe not enough clear in the text of the Timaeus, because on the one hand, we are told that this principle would be set in motion by what it enters to it, but on the other hand, we are told that what actually moves and makes this receptacle appear to be moved are the images entering into it. And actually, since it is something which is identical with itself and doesn't depart from its own nature, so it must be itself, in itself, changeless. And at the end, we are told that these things, the appearances entering into the receptacle, these things which come into and go out of it, are images of things that really are on mimemata. They are imprints of them produced in a way which is difficult to articulate and astonishing to the utmost. So the last text I have picked up from this section of the Timaeus, which deals with this third principle, this new principle or additional principle of becoming in the Timaeus, is the one in which the terms kora, topos, and pou are used to design it. And at the same time, a passage which explains how this principle works actually in making the images of the intelligible forms which it mirrors to appear as something spatially extended, as something which occupies a place. I would read this text in the English translation because it is a very important and illuminating text. Third is space. Space is kora in Greek. Third principle is space, or third genos is space, which is everlasting, not admitting destruction. providing a situation for all things that come into being, but itself apprehended without the senses by a sort of bastard reasoning. I have spoken about it, why we cannot grasp it properly by thought, because it has no form, and hardly an object of belief for the same reason. This indeed is that which we look upon as in a dream, and say that anything that is must needs be in some place and occupy some room. So as it is as if we were looking into a looking glass, and the looking glass would be responsible for the fact that we see some images and not the reality itself. So that must needs be in some place and occupy some room. What we see there appears to us as something specially extended. And that what is not somewhere in earth or heaven is nothing. So it makes us believe that this is the only reality. Because of this dreaming state, we prove unable to rouse up ourselves and to draw all these distinctions and others akin to them, even in the case of the waking and truly existing nature. The intelligible being is meant here. And so to state the truth, namely that, this is the truth, whereas for an image, since not even the very principle of which it has come into being belongs to the image itself, but it is the ever-moving semblance of something else. So whereas for an image it is proper that it should come to be in something else, clinging in some sort to existence on pain of being nothing at all. On the other hand, that which has real being has the support of the exactly true account, which declares that so long as two things are different, neither can ever come to be in other in such a way that the two should become at once one and the same thing and two. So as you see, we have here another epistemological account, which this time justifies the introduction of the additional principle of becoming, which is space, and which explains why we are inclined to believe that everything which exists has a sort of special, of extended reality, which actually is not the case, because these specially extended appearances are on this account images of the intelligible forms, which are not specially extended, in a sort of receptacle or in a sort of space where they appear as if they were specially extended. Now, this is what I wanted to point at as the way Plato in the Timaeus conceives of space and of the role it plays in the overall structure of the universe. Something must be added to this, which I didn't document by texts, because it would take us too far. Namely, the fact that this principle itself, like intelligible being, is conceived of as something which precedes the making of the universe, that is anyway as a principle which is more basic than becoming itself. So we have two principles which are prerequisites of every becoming: intelligible being at the one hand and space at the other hand. And only through a sort of maybe interplay between them, or maybe a sort of agency on the part of one of them, namely the intelligible being plus the demiurge, upon the other one, that is the space, the becoming itself comes into being or comes about as a result of it. This is what emerges from this central section of the Timaeus. But as you know, this sort of becoming is not the final result of what happens, or of what we have to suppose, according to Plato and his Timaeus, in order to explain how the universe is organized, or does actually appear the way it appears, namely as an ordered whole, which display a sort of beauty, which consists, as we are told, ultimately in the fact that there is some sort of regularity within the universe, and that there is a lot of symmetrical relationships within the universe. So in order to get there, the becoming, which is explained in this way, so intelligible forms of fire, air, earth, and water appear as a sort of blurred images in this mirror, which is the space, the receptacle as the space, but they change one into another without having a sort of persistency, and without really being ordered and beautiful. They appear first time rather as something disorder and rather ugly, as we are told. So in order to make it ordered really, a second step is added, which consists in giving them a sort of determinacy and a sort of relative stability by means of numbers and shapes. That is, by structuring them into the shapes of the four regular bodies. That is this other section of the Timaeus you are certainly acquainted with. So there will be some additional step in the making of the universe, which will consist in the mathematization of becoming. But this mathematization will take place already on the basis of what came into being in the receptacle. That is the spatial extension of the phenomena is already a condition for making sensible bodies mathematically determined. Now, I pass to, as I see that I'm short of time a little bit, I pass to the last section of my presentation, which concerns the conception of time we have in Timaeus, and it will be shorter. As you certainly know, because you have discussed the topic thoroughly, as I saw, Timaeus' conception of time. The fact is that unlike space, time is something which comes about within the process of the constitution of the universe, and one could even say as a sort of its accomplishment, as a final touch of its ordering. So I underline that this is unlike the space, because space in this conception is a precondition, is a prerequisite of becoming itself, whereas time will be a sort of structure produced by the aid of mathematical means, again by the aid of numbers and geometrical figures or shapes, which will be added to the realm of becoming as a whole. So, as you know, I took just two texts. The first one, text number 10, comes just after the passage where we have the definition of time as against the eternity and the distinction of different parts of time and the distinction of different kinds of time. It comes just after, but it sums up the basic conception of what time is in Plato's eyes. I will read it. So, as that pattern is the living being, this is the intelligible living being as a model for ordering this world as a kind of sensible living being. So as that pattern is the living being that is forever existent, he, named Demiurge, sought to make this universe also like it, so far as it might be in that respect. Now, the nature of that living being was eternal, and this character, it was impossible to confer in full completeness on the generated thing. But, excuse me, yeah, excuse me, this is the passage with the definition of the time. I first wanted to take the text 9, excuse me, I go back to the text 9. Time came into being together with the heaven, in order that, as they were brought into being together, so they may be dissolved together, if ever their dissolution should come to pass. This is important because as we see here, time is a part of the universe which is brought into existence. And this is a sharp contrast as against space, which was something as a precondition of this becoming. And I follow, and it is made after the pattern of the ever-enduring nature, in order that it may be as like that pattern as possible. For the pattern is a thing that has being for all eternity, whereas the heaven, namely the created universe, or the ordered universe, has been and is and shall be perpetually throughout all time. In virtue then of this plan and intent of the God for the birth of time, in order that time might be brought into being, sun and moon and 5 other star wanderers, as they are called, were made to define and preserve the numbers of time. Having made a body for each of them, etc., etc. So as you see here, the production of time, because time is something which is produced by the demiurge, presupposes the existence of bodies. And as we know from the whole context of the Timaeus, not only of bodies, but also of soul and souls, which are another kind of entity, somehow in between intelligible forms on the one hand and sensible bodies on the other hand, but which anyway, like sensible bodies in their geometrical shapes, is produced by means of numbers and geometrical figures. So in order to have time, we not only need the becoming itself, we also need to have bodies mathematically structured, and we need to have souls mathematically structured as well. And time would be nothing else at the end as their ordered movement, that is, processes of change, that occurs within the domain of bodies and of souls, because these bodies ultimately are ensouled bodies, processes of change which can be measured once by the others. That is, processes which are regular because they are circular, because they are periodic. A periodic movement can be counted, and one counted movement can serve as a measure for another counted movement. They can measure the others. And this counted and measured regular movement is called time, and it is somehow the crown of the process of ordering the cosmos, a sort of final touch of it, whereas the space was one of 2 prerequisites of it. This is what I wanted to tell you, and I apologize for having been a little bit longer than I should have been. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Filip. It was a very dense and intriguing talk. And it's true that you touched points that we discussed in our previous seminars and workshops, but still we know that Plato has always something to say, and we always have something to say when commenting his text. So the discussion is open. Are there questions also for clarification or, I don't know, comments? Okay, Laura.
Okay, thank you for the very clear talk and interesting talk, because I have to say, first of all, that I'm not a specialist in ancient philosophy, but more in the history of modern philosophy. So maybe my interpretation of Plato is a bit I don't know, not philologically pure, but yeah, in my view of the Kora and the way I have understood it, I associate it with the, maybe also Plato does it, with the notion of continuous. So not with quality, not with the not with concept related to mathematical space or geometrical space. So it's not properly a space in the way we conceive space. So we associate space usually as moderns with dimensions, with geometry, but in the way we have to understand, in the way I understood Plato, Kora is more, the idea of pre-dimensional or pre-adimensional, so something which is not a quantity but a quality. And I don't know if it's possible to say in this sense that we find two concepts of space in Plato Timaeus. I don't know if you can say something about this problem.
Thank you very much, Laura. This is a very pertinent comment and question. So there is, I would say, there is an ambiguity in the term of Kora in the Timaeus, and in this sense, maybe you are right if you say that maybe there are two different concepts of place or of Kora in the Timaeus, because on the one hand, it is a principle of something. That is, it is an explanatory principle, an ontological principle as well. It is something which explains why something else is the way it is. And what it explains, this was one of the text, the last text in the section on the space. What it explains is the fact that sensible reality appears to us or appears as something extended. So it explains the extension of something. So the fact that there are different places, and that if we have a complex thing, this complex thing is not located in one single point, but occupies different places by its different parts. And Kora is the principle of it. It causes it. It makes phenomena extended. But on the other hand, we are told that Kora itself is a topos. Itself is a pu, a where, a sort of whereabouts, a sort of receptacle, and so on, as if it was space in a rather the more modern sense. No? Of course, not a geometrical space, because there is no it has no form, it has no limits, it has no center and periphery, it has no directions. So it's an amorph sort of, as you say, spatial continuity, not temporal one. But I see a sort of ambiguity here, because as a principle, it causes extension, but we are told that it itself is a sort of extended entity. where something else appears. And as you know, Aristotle will criticize Plato for ambiguities of his conception of chora, and will raise the question as to know whether the chora of Plato is a topos or is topos or meta, and will say no, that this is no topos. Topos is something else. This is meta, actually, what Plato is speaking about. So there was, in the eyes of Aristotle as well, there was not enough clarity in the way Plato conceives of chora. But to my eyes, it is striking, and it is undeniable that what he once explained by this concept and by this principle is the simple fact that things we perceived by senses, unlike intelligible objects, are extended things. I don't know whether or not I have answered your question.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I don't want to take more time to the other questions, but I have a short follow-up. So in the sense, when we when we see, or maybe later, Sylvia, it's better. So when
if it's a follow-up, then go ahead.
Just that you can also answer later. So every time we have this pre-principle or pre-something, and then the thing in the word, so pre-space and then space, then my question is always what kind of relationship we have. Is a chronological relation? No, because we don't have time. Is an ontological relationship? How do we have to understand?
Just
that.
Short answer, I would say it's a causal relationship. It's a causal relationship, maybe not a very, very likely not temporal one, but a causal. That is, that there would be no things spatially extended unless there is this principle.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we have Lorenzo Giovannetti and Laura Marongiu.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Filip. Very nice.
Hi, Lorenzo.
See you again so soon. Yeah, if I can, I have two very brief questions. So the first one is a sort of a follow-up of what has just been asked. There is, from an Aristotelian point of view, this notion of space or receptacle is a sort of a gold stag, because on the one hand, it's being presented, connoted by the attributes of substance, in a sense, as a sort of independent being, the only one deserving the tudo tode jargon, right? But at the same time, and this is in your T7, it absolutely does not depart from its power. So it's not actually affected by what is hosting in a way that is always potentially receptive. And this is, of course, a sort of gold stag from an Aristotelian point of view. I'm pointing this out because at the same time, there is this en-ho jargon. So this idea of, which if compared to the Aristotelian use of it, it's of course much less metaphorical because it's meant to account for space, literally. So this in which is to be taken to some extent as literal. But what I wanted to point out and hear from you about that is we have on the one hand this unacceptable Aristotelian side to this notion of space, because it's at the same time purely substantial and purely dynamic or potential. But at the same time, it's used to account for the existence of something that is that's grounded in it. So this is sort of first remark. And very quickly, the second question is this coming together of heaven and time is also related, and I think you skipped it like in the last text of your handout. It's related to time reckoning, and so the relation to movement as a way to find this rational reckoning of what is going on in the universe. So my question is, would you connect it to a very famous remark in Republic 10, so 602, that is, by measuring, calculating, measuring, and weighing, we are in contact with the rational part of the soul, and so we have this idea of reckoning as key to understanding the very notion of order and consequently of time. So just these two questions. Microphone, Philip, sorry.
Excuse me. Thank you, Lorenzo. I'm not entirely sure whether I have grasped everything, but I will try to answer somehow. There is something Plato and Aristotle have in common. They both think that motion, and motion for them both means change, that change is something more fundamental than time, because time is something we can observe on changing things if we can measure the changes by something, by a sort of measure which basically is number. But they agree in this respect. In Aristotle, it implies that in order to have motion, we have first to suppose substances which move. So there is no motion without something moving. And there is no time without something moving. As for the place, for Aristotle as well, there is no place without a substance which occupies this place. More precisely, the place is nothing else than the boundary between the substance and its environment. So there is no place for room as something which exists itself by itself. A fortiori, there is no void for Aristotle as for Plato. So this is a sort of polemic against the atomists. So in Plato's account of time can be well compared with that of Plato, because time is something on something else, is a characteristic of a certain kind of motion. It must be a regular motion for Plato. But and motion is motion of something. Again, it must be there something which moves. But in contrast to Aristotle, Plato is not a substantialist in respect with sensible reality. In this respect, he is a phenomenalist, I would say. So we have no substances in front of us. We have appearances, phenomena. And the only substances are the intelligible forms, of which the phenomena are the images. And I think this difference as against Aristotle, because you started with sort of comparison with Aristotle, this difference as against Aristotle explains to some extent also why in Plato we have space, which is not a boundary of just the topos of Aristotle, a boundary of a substance, but something else, which is a sort of condition of coming about of the appearances, which is the place of the phenomena. Plato needs it, whereas Aristotle doesn't. And on this background, against this background, we can also understand why Aristotle, in the end, will tell us what Plato is describing as a space actually isn't space but matter. And the matter is the principle of indeterminacy, the lack of determination. And this is what Plato means by his principle of Cora, because it is something which makes the appearances less determinate, less accurate than the intelligible forms. It is this which accounts for the lack of clarity in the realm of sensible phenomena as compared as to intelligible forms. So again, I don't know whether it was the answer to your questions or not.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so then we have Laura Maronto and then Victor Ilieski.
So thank you. It was very, very interesting. So I have a small question regarding the conception of space, and this question is quite connected to the question raised already by Laura, and perhaps also to the first point made by Lorenzo. So as you said, so Plato's conception of space is quite surprising for us because it's regarded as a principle of indeterminacy and so devoid of form. And so interestingly, once this space, when this Shora is structured by means of mathematical ratios, we could say, so at some point an ordered universe comes about. So to say, we have in the beginning this formless space, and then in the end the well-ordered universe. But it seems to be that there is so nothing in between. So such an abstract, or better said in Platonical terms, like non-sensible, an abstract or non-sensible entity that which would be not yet a body, but space as geometrically extended entity, perhaps an intermediate or something like that. So my question would be, is it correct to say that according to Plato, no distinction can be made between Shora on the one hand and topos on the other, so between space and place, as you perhaps we can say yes, according to the text number 8 you were quoting, where he seems to use both of them so as synonyms. And secondly, how do we arrive to a conception of space as place understood in terms of extension? So is it with Aristotle already, or should we wait a bit more? So this is perhaps a bit beyond the Timaeus. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. I would say that, you know, we have this notion of Cora, we translate as space, and this notion is called in the text of Timaeus itself also topos. So as for the terms, it's synonymic and in Plato. So, but these are only words. The real question is what these words denote. I don't think that what Plato calls chora is a geometrical space, because we are accustomed to a notion of geometrical space in a Cartesian way, with 3 dimensions, coordinates, and so on. It's structured, actually, space. But chora will not be a structured geometric space, because what the first function of the chora is in Plato is the fact that it receives these images. It is like a mirror. If we have the intelligible forms, they are there, over there. If there wasn't chora, if there wasn't a looking glass, there would be no phenomenal world. This is the basic function. So space is like a mirror, like a looking glass, put under the or against the intelligible forms and producing images. But we are told in the Timaeus that it produces images that are not that much like their models, and they move in a chaotic way. But to put it briefly, it produces a chaos of appearances, a chaos which has no structure and no orientation, which could be described or grasped by mathematical means. You cannot count, and you cannot catch figures, because it always changes in all directions. But this is what the chora itself produces, what it itself does. In order to become something mathematically structured, the elemental body, triangles, Platonic regular bodies, the soul in its harmonic inner structure and in its geometrical, spherical or circular shapes. In order to get these, Plato needs an action by the demiurge, who is an intellect, or who thinks, who conceives of these appearances as if they were mathematically structured and determined, and by the same token rationally describable. But this is not what does the chora. It is something which does the demiurge, the organizer. So mathematical determinations, basically numbers and figures, are not to be sought, are not to be looked for in the space itself. It is something which rational activity introduces into the chaos produced by this mirroring activity of the space. This is the picture we get in the Timaeus. So, and I think the fact that ultimately the cosmos is conceived of as a geometrically structured body with parts you can count and measure is due to the fact that the demiurge produces the soul of the world, which is the first extended thing, which is geometrically well organized, with a center, with a periphery, with a number of inner circles and motions which are commensurable ones against the others, and to the fact that the same demiurge, as it seems, but it is not that clear in the Timaeus, but anyway, we are told that the God shaped the precosmic chaos by the means of numbers and figures. So the same demiurge produces mathematically structured bodies. They don't come about as such out of the Korah. Is it okay?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, so Victor, please.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Professor. I would have 3 questions, and I'll pose the first 2. And if there is more time left, I could ask the 3rd one as well. So, first question, you spoke about intelligibles in the Timaeus, and you also mentioned the demiurge. There is this 37a passage where the demiurge is called the best of the intelligibles. So I would ask for your opinion. Would you think that this is an indication that the demiurge should be read as some kind of a form or idea, which is as some interpreters tend to think? Or would you agree with Chernis that when the demiurge is spoken as the best of the intelligibles, it simply means that he is one of the intelligible categories, which are several in Plato's works? So this would be the first question. The second question is about the corporeality or the bodily nature of the elements and even of the traces, because we are said that the elements are bodies, but it seems also that the traces or the elements or the mimemata of the forms are also bodies, because they are visible. Already the early chaos is visible, and what is visible is bodily. So my question would be, how do you, or how would you explain, or what do you think about the issue of how these elements or traces acquire their corporeality? I don't know whether
Yes.
I was clear.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So the first question is about the demiurge and his status within Plato's metaphysics, let us say, a quaestio vexata. There is this passage about which seems to qualify him as the best of intelligibles. In a general sense, that there is another passage that I quoted under T5, where he is called Aristoston Ition, but here we are limited on the ITI. So let us say, but we know that intelligible forms can also be conceived as a kind of idea. So if you ask me what I think, I myself, it is a question which can hardly be settled once for all, but I am rather in line with Chernis, and I think that demiurge in the Timaeus, but not only in the Timaeus, in the Filibus, for example, as well, is conceived as a cause of Genesis, and is conceived as a nous, as a discourse of genesis of an ordered universe. This cause of becoming of the order of something which has been not ordered. This also, and in this sense, he is an ordering intellect. And as an ordering intellect, I think in Plato, he relies on the knowledge of intelligible forms, and intelligible forms are something more basic, I think, than their knowledge. For Plato, for Aristotle, for the whole of Plato's and Platonic and Aristotelian metaphysics in antiquity. So I don't think that we should quickly identify demiurge with the highest form. It would mean that the act of knowledge is something higher or more fundamental than the object of knowledge. And this goes, as it seems to me, against Plato's epistemology and metaphysics, against the book 6 of Republic as well, when we have nous, which is enabled by the idea of the good, the act of knowledge. So this is for your first question. For your second question, what is a body in Plato? Not the same thing as in the atomists, or even in Stoics. Body, basically, I mean, in Plato, is a phenomenon which displays some phenomenal properties involving the fact of the capacity to be touched, to resist one the other, but nonetheless they are phenomenal realities. So you have asked to what extent, what is bodily on their geometrical structure, what is bodily on the pre-cosmic traces. And again, I would say pre-cosmic traces are, as we are expressly told, mimemata ton onton. There are some images, some appearances like images produced on water in the Republic. And pre-cosmic images are very indistinct, blurred phenomena, whereas bodies shaped by geometrical structure, the triangular substructure they have, are not only something we can perceive by senses, and this is the point, I think, but are at the same time something we can grasp rationally. We can describe by mathematical formulas, object of reasoning. So I think that if you ask my view on what Plato is offers in the Timaeus, so there is a phenomenal reality which is a sort of flux, blurred appearances of qualities, of different qualities, changing one into another. But we can reduce, we perceive it by senses, but we can also analyze it rationally by means of mathematical characteristics which are numbers and geometrical shapes, and discover, so to say, a mathematical structure in this apparent chaos of qualitative properties. So we can conceive of mathematical physics. And his idea is, which goes beyond our today's way of conceiving it, perhaps, his idea is that the world itself has already been rationalized this way by the very divinity who ordered it. It has been thought already before we thought it. This is the way I see what is Plato's project in the Timaeus, to tell us that we have to imitate the divinity who not only ordered some disorderly chaos in thinking it.
Well, if I may, I don't know,
Thank you.
Victor, do you want to add something more?
No, I just want to express my gratitude. And if there is a time for the third one, okay. If not, it's about the Chora, so we talked about it already.
I have actually a follow-up with regard to what Filip just said, in the sense that I deeply agree with you, in the sense that we normally represent the Chora, or we associate the Chora to chaos, or to disorderly motion, for example. In reality, things are subtler, and what you just said is extremely important. So, in a sense, we have to think of the cosmos by imitating or this agent that ordered it. Point is that the concept, of course, of imitation is fundamental in Plato's dialogues, and in the Timaeus is the same. When, for example, we think of the fact that the gods, in order to mix, the mixing of the elements, which is a fundamental, I'd say, action that is needed in order to have the cosmos as we have, is an action performed, as an activity performed by the gods, and it's the god that teaches the gods how to mix. And the mixing, which is fundamental in order to describe what happens to the elements in the Chora, is again very important to understand, or in my view, we get some hints with regard to the Chora and its function if we look at this activity of mixing. Because there is a very important function that the Chora has, and it's associated to the type of motion that pertains to it. Because to talk about the Chora as shaking, the shaking when associated to chaos, to something bad, let's say. In reality, the shaking can be periodic and ordered. It can give rise to vertical and horizontal vibrations. And when we play music, we use vertical or horizontal vibrations of the instruments in order to produce a harmony, to produce also sound, beautiful sounds, and so. In reality, the fact that the Chora shakes it doesn't mean that, well, the motion that that these vibrations generate can be disordered, of course, if we compare it to the circular motion, for example. But the periodicity of it can be perfectly regular, for example. And also the result of this shaking can be the mixing of the elements of a fundamental function that is needed in order to build up the world as we know it. So it's just now it comes my question. So do you think that we can identify the reasons why in so many centuries, throughout so many centuries, we didn't think of the Quora as, I mean, in these terms. So in a sense, it's something that orders the disorder.
This is a, thank you very much for this comment and this question. I wonder, this is a difficult issue because on the one hand, it seems that Quora is a principle that accounts for disorderly motion of the traces. Why the traces move at all? Why don't they stay still? They come about, and coming about, they change. So it is they coming about, and their motion goes hand in hand. This is the same principle which causes their appearance, causes also their change. I presume it must be the case, because otherwise we would be obliged to accept Janus's explanation that motion based on the Phaedrus, and on the law stand, there is but one source of motion, the self-motion of the soul. And even the motion of the precosmic traces in the Quora would be a side effect of the motions of the soul. So there is this interpretation also. But I don't agree with it.
It's clear that it's autopoietic, the motion generated by the Quora. So the Quora moves itself.
Yeah.
So that's pretty clear.
On the other hand, yes, I agree with you. But on the other hand, we are told that the Quora is set in motion by the things which enters it, so by the mimemata which enters it. They set the Quora in motion, and once being set in motion, it again sets in motion what is in it. So it is not described as the origin of this motion. First it's set in motion, and then it sets another things in motion. You want to say something, right? No.
Yeah, because what you say is, I mean, what seems, I mean, if I have to use an analogy, so think of a receptacle, so I don't know, well, a basket, something containing, a container that must, of course, be made of certain material in order to vibrate. So, but and I put something in it. I put something in it, and there is a sort of, you know, an impact, a first impact. Let's call it in this way. So due to this action, there is a first impact that, so to speak, propagates waves, and the container starts vibrating and also transmit again this type of motion to these vibrations to the things contained in it. The problem is that, okay, this is an analogy. Now, in my example, I put the things in the basket, let's say. How do we have to think of this type of dynamics without thinking of an agent putting these elements in the Cora? Because this is the point. Because it's clear that the type of vibrations that are generated are the result of an impact. Otherwise, it's not clear how an element vibrates by itself. There is another explication. If we think of music and the fact that, you know, I don't know, things can vibrate due to music, then these elements, well, not the elements themselves, but of course just the shadows of these elements could vibrate in this way and propagate to the container this type of motion. But still, it's complicated. Sorry if I interrupted you, but I think it's one of the most difficult questions that emerge in the Timaeus, the one that you just mentioned. How can we think of this orthopoietic motion of the Cora that, however, you know, is on the other hand generated by what is contained in it? So it's
Thank you. I see the point, the question. In my view, but I think that, you know, Plato, on the whole, Plato is in need of a principle of change. He must somehow explain why it is and how it is at all that there is no only intelligible being and intelligible forms which never change and are always identical with themselves, but there is something which changes and which is our empirical world perceived by senses. And of course, on the one hand, we have passages where Plato says all motion comes from the soul. But then we have the Timaeus. And Timaeus is more difficult because Timaeus deals also with making of the soul itself. And it questions making of the phenomena themselves, how they come about. So Timaeus is more in depth than other dialogues do in this respect. And in my view, the principle of Cora and this image of the shaking of the Cora, this pre-cosmic motion in the Cora, which involves the Cora itself somehow, it's an image. It lacks the ultimate clarity, but it seems to me that it testifies for the fact that Cora in Plato's account in the Timaeus is not only the principle which explains that phenomenal things appears to us as something extended in space, but it is at the same time a principle which accounts for the very fact that they change, that there is a process of change. So something like, this is why I think ultimately that Korah, although it is a principle which is identical with itself, is at the same time a principle of indeterminacy, that is, of the fact that something is not always the same, and not even graspable as something you can count. So in this sense, a sort of a principle of motion, of a disordered or disorderly motion, which must be ordered by mathematical, that is rational means, in order to get structured. And one point more, you said, in order to put something in something else, you need somebody doing it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, because if you take the example of mirror, you need to do nothing if you regard yourself in the mirror. So, but the mirror does it. And in the same way, I think Korah maybe mirrors the intelligibles without the intelligibles being forced to do whatever. So
yes, this is very fascinating, and I think there are many grounds in order to suggest to read or to interpret by means of the image of the mirror these passages. And I think that Victor had another question regarding the Korah, so that maybe we can, continue with this topic. Victor, please.
Well, I don't know. I would waive my right, because I don't want to bother the people. It's been a long time, so I don't know. Should I?
Yes, Victor.
Okay. Very briefly. So I just wanted to propose the following. I believe that we are often misled by the translation of Korah as space, and we try to interpret it as the Cartesian space, or as the Newtonian space, or I don't know, the atomist space, and things like that. So what it seems to me from the text of the Timaeus is that the Korah is a recipient, okay, but it is also kind of an undeterminate substance, and I would put a lot of stress on the ekmageion simile, because it seems that it really represents the way that Plato imagined how these things work. So like the images are not made out of it, as Aristotle would perhaps thing, but they're also not floating in it as in some kind of an empty background, but they're imprinted and they're remodeling it, and so the question remains: how shall we? And Zale has this paper or chapter in 2010, how to visualize, understand the Korah. So this is an issue, but I see it as let's say as a piece of wax, as or as a substance, some kind of indeterminate substance or a plenum filled with itself. So just very briefly, your opinion on that.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with you on this interpretation of the ekmageion imagery. So they are imprints, so like in wax. Whether it is a sort of substance or quasi-substance, you are right in warning us that translation of Cora as space is misleading because we think of Cartesian or Newtonian space, and so it's true. But another thing which may be misleading, I think, is to read back into Plato a concept of matter, which Plato doesn't have. Like this quasi-substance would be a sort of ekmageion as a matter in a rather Aristotelian sense, that out of which, but you have said yourself, it is not that out of which something is made, but in which something is imprinted.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. No, frankly speaking, I myself, I don't know. So on the one hand, it seems to me that it is a principle of something, and I am able to spell out what is the function of this principle, but I cannot see clearly what this principle is in itself.
Exactly.
And it's true that Plato tells us that we cannot see this way just by a notos logismos or something like mogis piston. It's unbelievable. So maybe there is no way to.
And his definitions are actually functional. When he defines the hora, it seems that he defines it in a functional way. So I think you made a very accurate point. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, well, the window in basket, or the metaphors and the images associated to the hora are very different, and there is just I mean, what we can recognize is a sort of an indirect description of its functions. So it's a container. It's also,
Yes.
something generating a certain type of, as we said, motion mixing, but at the same time, this is propagated first from what is contained within it to itself. So it's very hard for us, but still it means that we will have more work to do with regard to this topic. Are there other questions or remarks from other people? Okay, so well, then I would like to thank you very much again, Filip, for having presented today.
Thank you.